are we doing here, Dan? In your own words, what are we doing?
So I say we introduce ourselves first. I'll let you go ahead and maybe just a little quick bio um, and we'll both kind of maybe at the end kind of talk about what our purpose is with having these conversations. Um, yeah, let folks know who you are and why we're doing this, and I'll pitch in my 2 cents when you're done.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, I'll go first. So I'm John Bachman, your little brother. And I'll let whoever's watching this guess the age difference,
Oh yeah.
because people often ask me who's the older brother, but they always recognize us as brothers. In fact, I think you have been recognized as my brother
Yes.
while we were thousands of miles apart by someone who only knew me.
Yes. Yes. That
Did,
happened.
did not did not even know you existed. Um, so anyway, I'm John Bachman, military PA, among other things. I've been in the Army a while, and I'm in Tennessee, and probably I think the way most people who are not my patients or coworkers, former coworkers, know me is that is my interest in fetal pain and abortion in a broader sense. Fetal pain has no direct connection to abortion, except that the other side, the pro-abortion side, pro-choice side, really seems to think there is, even as they deny it. It's very complicated. Uh, what else should I say about myself?
Well, you've flown
Um,
Blackhawks, John.
oh well, yeah. I figured you should throw. I don't usually lead with that. That's something that
Yeah.
I let people discover
Part of your
because
backstory.
yeah, yeah, yep. Um, you and I grew up in East Texas as vegetarians, and we spent some years in a trailer park. We grew up under a house that we built around us. Started out with no roof per se, and we roofed it, and we sheetrocked it, and painted
Dug the
it,
sector
and
lines by hand.
yeah. So if we dug the septic lines by hand, what were we doing for bathrooms before that?
Yes.
I'll let you ponder that. I'd forgotten about that until I was down in Joint Readiness Training Center, JRTC, down in Louisiana for a rotation out in the woods, the hinterlands training. And, we have to dig our own, what we call cat holes out there. We don't have access to bathrooms or latrines or anything. And I was wondering why it seemed so natural to me. And then as I was pondering, shall we say, I realized that I had a very deep and rich history of digging my own, my
Of
own
pooping
cattle.
outdoors.
Yes, thank you. Pooping outdoors behind our house when I was a child. So, I mean, I think that's a pretty evocative introduction right there. And
Yeah.
I dare not say more for the time being, unless we try.
It's
I'll
it's
pitch it
so
to you.
wild. Our
Yeah,
Bachman family history is just this bizarre Forrest Gump story. It seems like all of us. We end up in these
agreed.
weird situations that yeah, it's like Forrest Gump. I mean, that's you and I have talked about this before, how it just seems like this is incredible. We'll probably talk about some of these anecdotes.
Yeah,
I mean, you with your fetal pain and running into two of these diametrically opposed, but world thought leaders in your field. Just ran into them randomly one time. Anyway, I'll let you tell that story. But
yeah, and that this is my and I guess when you asked about the purpose, you're right. It is Forrest Gump. You're not the first. We've both heard it separately
yeah,
about our own lives, Forrest Gump style. And I guess my purpose is a to for ourselves to kind of capture some of that, and to share it, because none of us lives forever, and we're far flung, and this is a from my perspective, and I think we agree on this. This little video conversation slash podcast. I hesitate to call it podcast because that's cliche, but it's for us. It's for me. This is for me and for you, Dan, from my
yeah,
perspective. And if anybody else wants to get the benefit of listening in or watching with us, then I welcome it. Probably be friends and family who would get the most benefit out of it.
yeah.
But but I also think that, we talked about this as maybe a clearinghouse of condensation nuclei for further thoughts for ourselves, for anybody who might watch. And honestly, I think there's organizational value in discussing topics with someone who is who can spur your mind to further thought, and that's you in my case.
And it's you and mine. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And that's why you and I have such great conversations, John, is because
Yeah,
I mean, I'd like to think that we're both, I mean, I consider you a very thoughtful guy who doesn't just do things because you've always done them that way. You think about why you do things and you like to have a reason for things. You consider your worldview, and I'd like to think I do the same, or try to anyway, and keep my worldview as accurate as it can be. I mean, just pulling back from 30,000 feet talking about things, um, but yes, we have great conversations because I think in part we both care about finding truth, seeking truth, or getting as close to it as we can get. And we have slightly different viewpoints. I mean, some of us, sometimes some things we may disagree about completely. We may
yeah.
have completely opposite positions on. I can't think of any of it off the top of my head, but I know that, I mean,
Well,
we're different
theism.
humans.
Yeah,
Theism. Yeah.
theism.
There you
Yeah.
go. That's a great
You you
example.
you have I don't know what I think you call yourself an agnostic or a deist maybe now.
Agnostic. Yeah, I would say agnostic or atheist, with the meaning that there is no God that I currently believe in.
Good.
Not a claim that no gods exist, but there
Yeah.
are none that I've been presented with that I have subscribed to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I go ahead.
I was just going to say, if theism is the belief in a God, then atheism should be no belief in a God. But yet I don't go so far. Yeah, agnostic is a better way to put it. Just because I'm like,
Okay.
well, I'm not convinced by anything yet. My mind is open though.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and okay, thank you for that. And to contrast, to follow up on your point, I'm a theist. I've tried atheism. I've tried functional atheism while living as a theist.
Oh, I did not know
So,
that, John.
so incongruity. Yeah, so this is partly
Uh,
why we're having from my perspective.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a really long trial of atheism, but it
Sure.
was it was a trial, and it never took. But anyway, I don't want. I've already introduced myself.
Sure.
So what? Tell me your background, who you are.
Yeah. So Dan Bachman, born in '68, which is crazy to say. I was born in the '60s. Crazy to say I'm going to be 55 in a couple months. I don't feel like 55. I'm a chiropractor. Unlike most chiropractors, I pretty much practice like a physical therapist. So spine rehab, with a rehab focus on spine and extremities. So lots of chiros, just crack backs essentially. So that's just one tool in our toolbox, and I like to use them all, or at least have them all at my disposal. I practice here in Austin, Texas. I've been in practice for about 20, almost 23 years. And which again is crazy to say. It's crazy to be able to say, something happened, you know, I was an adult 20, 30 years ago. It's insane. Um,
Yeah.
and as far as, I don't know, sports, hobbies, etc. I love beach volleyball, as you know. I haven't been able to play for a while because I'm dealing with a cancer issue right now, which you also know about, but I'll fill in a few blanks here for anyone not watching. So basically, I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer about 2 years ago, spring 21. And at that point, my symptoms were so bad, I'd pretty much assumed it was cancer. Then I got my colonoscopy. Sure enough, there it was. Then for all of 2021, I did chemo and radiation, which seemed to be helping. I mean, I was feeling better. My tumors were all shrinking. And stage 4 just means it's not just the colon. In my case, there were like 6 spots in my liver and 3 spots in my lung. So that's what makes it stage 4. And so that 2021 did a bunch of chemo and radiation. Tumors were shrinking. Some were disappearing in my liver. Everything was looking good. Bowel movements getting easier. If we're going to go right to the TMI stuff here.
Let's just go straight there.
Yes. And then last year, 2022, had about 6 surgeries over roughly a year, and removed part of my colon, a third of my liver.
It was 6
And
surgeries? So was it
yeah,
6?
if we count the liver biopsy, lung biopsy,
Oh,
port
yeah. Yeah, we
installed,
do. We count those.
having
Yeah.
my port installed. I mean, I'm under for all these things. And
Yeah.
then, so that's 3, and
Gosh.
then liver, and then colon bisection with an ostomy bag put on, and then the
Yep.
ostomy reversal, where
It's
they take the
reattached.
bag off. Yeah.
Yep. Got everything
So
reattached.
that's right. Got my tubes, got my plumbing reattached again, and it works, sort of.
Yeah.
Uh, and however, so that my last surgery was almost a year ago. It was August of last year. I was in the hospital for 2 months. I couldn't eat for 2 months because the ostomy bag that was supposed to be my food was that I ate was supposed to be diverted into this bag while the colon's resection healed, but nothing was going into the bag. So I couldn't eat because anything I ate would just inflate me. So I was in the hospital for 2 months, supposed to be a 3-day stay. Couldn't eat for 3 months, lost 51 pounds, walked out. Well, didn't walk out. I was in a wheelchair for a couple of weeks. I weighed 129 pounds
It's
and I'm 6'1".
unbelievable.
I'm
You're
6'1".
6'1" and 129 pounds. For reference, our dad is 5'9"
Yeah.
and a very skinny 135 maybe.
Yeah. So I weighed less than
Very
that. And
man,
yeah,
that is beyond that is beyond.
and I got pictures. We may throw them up on here. So if you see some pictures, that we threw them up on this on screen later. But I couldn't. I mean, I'd wasted away, and I'm in starving for 2 months. So then recovered from that, got my ostomy off, did another round of scans, chest, abdomen, pelvis, and stuff grew back. So found a spot in my liver, and the 3 spots in my lungs hadn't changed in size, but then they started growing. They grew by a millimeter. The one in my liver doubled in size back in June. We are now September 14th, 23. And back in June of this year, that's when I had my last scan. I just got my blood work again. Results came in yesterday. So I got a Signatera test, which measures tumor molecules in the blood, and it jumped by 10x, 10 times what it was in June. So not good. Just got off the phone before this with my oncologist, scheduled another round of CTs, and booked an appointment with my oncologist. So we're going to see what the game plan is. So it's a really neat, that's something I want to talk about a little bit today.
Yeah.
I want to talk
Yeah.
about your topic first. We'll bring up the topics in a minute, but what I want to talk about is the experience. I'll talk a little about the experience of being death adjacent, which is, it's not
Yeah.
something, well, it is something that plenty of people in the world get to experience.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it is because, lots of people get cancer and other terminal diseases. And so you have time to think about this thing. And I would have never guessed that the experience would be like it is. Like if you told me 10 years ago, oh, you're going to have cancer, I would think, oh my God, I'm going to be miserable. All I'm going to be able to think about is, I'm getting carved up inside. There's acid eating me out from the inside, which are thoughts that I've had, but they don't dominate my thoughts at all. So we'll talk more about that. And one other thing I'll add to my bio is I developed my own rehab approach, as you know, John, for musculoskeletal conditions, which would be moving parts, shoulders, necks, knees, backs, hips, elbows, whatever. There is no scientific consensus on what causes body pain.
That is useful to know because I think a lot of people, a lot of medical providers, certainly don't realize that. We
Yes.
just like, okay, I have some basic knowledge of musculoskeletal rehab. It's not really what I do as a PA, but in the Army, I see an awful lot of musculoskeletal conditions, probably the
Sure.
number one thing that I see. And so I will recommend some home exercise programs and then I'll send them off to you guys. A lot of times they'll specifically request a chiropractor, which I try to discourage them away from.
I don't blame you. I don't
But,
blame you.
but some people, but honestly, knowing what I know, it's probably just as likely to benefit them as to not, or
That
as to do anything else. So I'm like, sure, if you want to go, I'll refer you. And by the way, while I have the mic here, there's a guy named Alex I met at the hotel in DC when I was there last week. I told him that I would tell you about him and see if you have any, he has sciatica. And
Oh
I see
yeah.
this a lot. People are like, "Oh, you're a healthcare provider. I've got this, whatever." I conducted, an exam. I showed up some stretches there in the hotel lobby, and I've done the same thing a couple weeks ago at the AT&T store with this guy I met there. And I was like, "Oh." So anyway, so I told him about your videos and your initiative and your efforts and your passion. And I told him I'd tell you. His name's Alex. I'll send you his information later if you're interested.
I'd love to talk with him. Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't want to interrupt too much, but I also didn't want to forget. I'm a man of
Yes.
my word. It just may be delayed a little bit. But okay, so tell me a little bit, and even though I'm very well familiar,
Mhm.
about your white paper.
Okay, so yes, so this basically I got out of school 23 years ago and discovered, wait a second, they didn't really tell us how to fix anything. We learned all about anatomy and physiology and biochem and you know uh radiology. I mean, we learned everything except what actually causes pain and how to fix it. So I got out of school. I'm like, well, maybe it was just my school. Maybe my school, maybe it wasn't the best, and maybe they didn't teach us that stuff when they should have. So I went and scoured all the research, and I found all the experts. Listened to all the podcasts, watched all the lectures, and read the books. No one else knows. Like, just as an example, no one knows what causes back pain. No one knows what causes a crick in the neck when you wake up and you can't turn your head. All these real common things, or a common headache. If it's not a migraine, or it's not like, brain tumor or something like that, people pretty much don't know what causes these things. So that's why if you as a listener have ever been to a doctor or gone online and done your own research, which will just confuse you even more, you're going to find people with all kinds of opinions, and they're all like disagreeing with each other. Some of them seem crazy because they are. And I think that's because in the absence of some kind of consensus and guidelines that, hey, these are tried and tested, this is the right approach, even if it's just a template, in the absence of that, you get mythology. And I think that's where a lot of these kind of crazy harebrained schemes come from. And I'll include a lot of chiropractic claims, like claiming it can cure asthma, or leg length inequalities being the reason for a problem, or pelvic tilt, or tight hip flexors,
Misalignment.
misalignment.
Yeah,
Absolutely. All these things that if you've ever seen a chiropractor, they have told you. You've heard these before. And often if you've seen a PT as well.
I've never seen a chiropractor, by the way, Dan.
You see
Never.
one
I'm
right now.
looking at one, but I've never seen one. My eyesight's very poor.
Yes, yes. Well, when you're blind, I guess you don't see anybody.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but so anyway, I decided if science doesn't know why pain happens, I'm going to figure it out myself, which was hugely arrogant and, naive. You could call it all the things you want, and they'd all be correct. However, over years of A/B testing and experimenting with things and observing things, I found a really simple template that I use as my initial approach for all musculoskeletal complaints, whether it's, shoulder, neck, hip, back, whatever. And it works incredibly well. Beats the pants off anything I've ever seen anywhere else. So until I find something better, that's what I'm using. And to your earlier point, I'm converting all my rehab protocols, my low back pain rehab protocol, converting it into an online course that anyone can take, assess themselves, figure out why they hurt, plug in the things that will likely help, in my opinion and experience, and get this. So that way these ideas can spread. Hopefully they work, and not just when I'm doing them. That's another part of this test, is I'm testing, hey, is it somehow that I'm magically help people get better just by my personhood?
Your
Or
aura.
is this something that is reproducible out in the wild from people who have
Yeah.
never met me? That's a big question. And I suspect it's going to work elsewhere. In fact, I've already got some limited information so far, because I have some physios in various countries, the UK and South Africa and a couple other places, who are using these same techniques and seeing better results with their own patients. So it's encouraging, but I haven't launched the whole thing completely. So it's very close. We're this close to launching, and wrote a white paper explaining my approach, which if you're interested in it, if you're a healthcare provider or just somebody who's interested in, musculoskeletal stuff, drop a line in the comments saying you would like it and a good email address to send it to, and I'm happy to share.
He's talking to not me here, by the way. I am a healthcare provider. I would like it, but I already have it. So
So for anyone listening, and here I'll put this in here too while we're thinking about it. So this little podcast experience we're experimenting with, we're just going to see where it goes, and it is a kind of I see it as being perhaps kind of a compendium of our conversations and thoughts, and a chance for you and I to chat more because we live in different states. Yep. John, you're in, is it Kentucky? Tennessee. You're in
close
Tennessee.
Enough. So Fort Campbell is the address is Kentucky, but but I'm in Tennessee.
Okay. So a great way for us to stay in touch. Also, if anyone watching has a question you'd like us to discuss, drop it in the comments down below. And hey, we're always looking for things that are topical and interesting to folks listening who might want to hear what we yammer on about. So don't hesitate to leave a topic in the comments below.
And by always interested, he means we're just starting to be interested, because we're just starting this thing. No, but we are always interested.
Our long history, a long catalog and library of podcasts. We've always been in. Yeah, this is session number 1. So we have 0 viewers right now.
We are always interested because, one divided, we're just starting. We're at the inflection point of history, Dan. So for us, for the last few seconds is always for this podcast history. So you're right. You're exactly right. Yeah.
So John, you had an interesting thing happen to you on the theme of Forrest Gump, falling into situations that are kind of incredible and at the same time sort of not surprising because they happen all the time. Jordan Peterson, who is if you don't know him, you probably have heard of him. I think he's a Canadian. Is he a psychotherapist?
He is a clinical psychologist.
Clinical psychologist.
Can you hear me when I'm eating these? By the way, these are delicious.
Oh, they look good. I hear you fine.
I mean, but can you hear me crunching them?
Oh, no.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
No,
please continue.
Away. So John posts on fetal pain a lot and has been in a lot of discussions. I'll let him tell you more about that. But Jordan Peterson reposted an article that you, John, wrote with an eminent fetal pain researcher, or pain researcher in general, right? Stuart.
Yeah. Stuart Derbyshire.
Stuart Derbyshire.
Derbyshire, yeah.
Derbyshire. So my understanding is he's up around the top of his field as far as who people turn to for these things. And I'll let you explain that. But I'd also, in fact, this would be a good just lead in. Just tell us what happened with this Jordan Peterson retweet of your paper.
Yeah. Okay. So a friend of mine, I woke up one morning to see a text by a friend of mine on the East Coast telling me, hey, John, Jordan Peterson retweeted your paper, or tweeted out your paper. The paper is called Reconsidering Fetal Pain, written with Stuart Derbyshire, a neuropsychologist, a neuroscientist in Singapore. And he and I got connected a number of years back, right when I was still in PA school, by the way. And so anyway, so in this paper, which is a huge story of its own, Stuart and I posit fetal pain emerging from as early as 12 weeks gestation, which is quite early, especially when you consider Stuart was not on board at all with fetal pain in general, certainly early fetal pain in particular, and our conversations were pretty amazing to me, honestly. The fact that we were even having conversations, me as a PA student, like a brand no background in medicine at all, now talking to one of the most eminent.
Didn't you just cold call him with an email?
Very much.
Is that what happened?
Yep, that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
That's like writing Elon Musk and going, "Hey, I think you're building your rockets wrong. Hey, can I advise you on that? Let's write a paper together."
Well,
Go ahead.
right. In fairness, I didn't lead with a "I think you're wrong," Stuart. That is where I was. That is absolutely where I was headed. It's inevitable. I was going to get there. But anyway, long story short, we wrote a paper. Crazy, I know, but we wrote a paper, and by we I mean mostly him. I consulted, and and Jordan Peterson, this 4.6 million subscriber haver, um, sort of firebrand. He's not a firebrand. He's more like a lightning rod, I would say. If you love him, you really love him. If you hate him, probably think he's. If there were such a thing as a devil, this could be him incarnate. So he tweeted out to his 4.6 million followers the other day, whenever it was, Tuesday maybe, and I saw that and I was like, all right, well that's cool. He'd kind of I've always okay. My background with Jordan Peterson is that I got his book back in 2017, and because I heard that he was someone to pay, who had some good ideas, and I started his book, and I was like, man, this guy is way too wordy, and he's got some, I'm not
Yeah,
sure I can wait. I can't wade through all this right now. I'm too
I feel the
busy.
same.
Hmm. He's too wordy. I didn't know anything else about him. Put the book aside. It was a Kindle ebook, and I put it aside and went on to whatever else. And I was new in New York, and that's actually right around the time that I met Stuart in for the first time in animal sentience, animal consciousness symposium at NYU. That kind of gets back to your earlier comment about meeting these random people. But so
Can I
anyway,
ask a question real quick? Sorry
yeah,
to
yeah,
derail
yeah,
you.
yeah. No,
Did you know
please.
who Stuart was when you ran into him?
Oh, at the symposium?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, because all right, so I should back up a little bit more. Okay, so in my study of fetal pain, which was grueling, by the way, just utterly, unbelievably grueling. It was right around, so 2015. I just started PA school. David Delyden's videos exposing Planned Parenthood. They wouldn't say it was exposing. They were perfectly happy to show these pictures. David Delyden was undercover journalist. Some say he claims, and I agree. He went into Planned Parenthoods across the United States and filmed videos about what he claims, and I'm sympathetic to this claim, were arrangements for sales of fetal body parts, which is illegal. And so we get down to a lot of definitions of what's a sale versus whatever, this and that. I'm not a legal scholar, but the videos themselves were absolutely grueling, and I had to know. In PA school, I just started. You mentioned a career as an aviator in the Army prior to this, and I didn't know anything. I was just, you are far more advanced in the medical field on this side. Even just given your emphasis on musculoskeletal stuff, far more about anatomy and physiology, about medicine, than I ever did. And I was brand new, and this hit me in the stomach, and I had to know if this was real, if fetal pain was real, because there's also a lot of fetal pain legislation. And so every day I would watch these videos that would come out, and I would choke back tears, and then I would go out to my car, maybe sometimes at lunch, and just like let it all out. And then
Wow.
after classes, I would take a moment in my car, maybe more than a moment, just kind of purge my emotions again, collect myself, and drive home to my young family. And
Yeah,
and
you
so
have
I
two little girls.
two girls, and they were very young then. One, Charlotte, was barely crawling or not walking yet when we moved there. And then Emily is, yeah, she was also quite young. So this it was the just the juxtaposition of my two young daughters with these images, and the idea that they could feel pain, that they could be killed by a smiling, urbane professional healthcare provider, which is what I was endeavoring to be. It was so surreal to me, and I just did not want to live in a world where this was possible. this scenario just seemed completely unbelievable, inconceivable, unacceptable. And so I said, if they feel pain, I need to know. It would have encouraged me if they couldn't feel pain, right?
Yeah.
Like abortion, right or wrong, does not depend on fetal pain whatsoever. I would
Mm.
much prefer that they could not feel pain.
They weren't suffering. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't like this. It wasn't like this was it wasn't a foregone conclusion that I would find that, in my opinion, fetuses can feel pain at a certain gestation. But I resolved to research it, and I did, and one name kept coming up over and over again, and it was Stuart, what I thought was Derbyshire, right? Because that's the right way to pronounce it. He just
That's
doesn't
how I
cover
would put
that.
it.
Yeah, but Derbyshire is the one thing to know about Brits is they pronounce everything kind of crazy. Like Worcestershire. That's
Yes.
and we've inherited
Worcestershire.
Worcestershire. Yeah, we have inherited some of that as their offspring in America. But Derbyshire is his name, and and his name kept coming up on literally everything that had anything to do with pain and fetal pain in particular. He wrote several seminal um, papers on it through Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. He had something to say everywhere. He was always cited, and so I saw his name pop up in a New York Times piece, and he was saying, this latest thing that we wrote with RCOG, Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, back in 2010, it seemed like a good idea, but I don't think it works. And so I was like, I was about ready to turn in my PA school thesis about a month out. And I was like, listen, this would be great for my own personal knowledge and to also to put into my thesis to see if I can get some personal communication from this eminent pain researcher. So I emailed him and went home and thought nothing more about it. I came back to school the next morning and there was an email from him and I about fell out of my chair. And he said, yeah, blah, blah. Can't remember what he said. And I was like, and of course, I'm not going to just be like, oh, well, thanks for your reply. See you later. There was lots of meat on the bone. And so for a vegetarian, that means there's lots to discuss. And and so I emailed him back, and then he emailed me back. And at some point, I was like, "Hey, you sure? Like, I'm just a PA student. Like a few months ago, I was flying helicopters. Like, I don't even know what I don't know here." He's like, "You know what? Honestly, you're pretty informed, and I like discussing this topic." And so I was like, "Okay, well, let's keep doing this." 3 years later, and I don't want to go through all the details. There's certainly, I could discuss this. We'll probably cover this again at some point. Um, Long story short, we wound up writing a paper together. I didn't think we'd have anything to agree on. But he's like, yeah, I think we can write a paper. So we did. And this paper posits fetal pain from as early as 12, maybe 13 weeks gestation, meaning that the cerebral cortex does not seem to be required in order to have a basic perception of pain. And
Now,
what I
if
just,
I could jump in for just a
yeah,
second and
please.
ask you,
Yeah.
uh, for my benefit and those listening,
Yeah.
didn't that position, was that a reversal or a deviation from his previous positions or the consensus at that time?
Yeah. Good question. As I look back through his earlier work, I think he was open to the idea. In a couple different papers, he mentions if we conceive of pain as some basic pain sensation, then it could occur very early. What he was basing his perception of the gestational age at which pain arises on was the definition of pain, which the International Association for the Study of Pain defined pain as a pretty complex phenomenon, and no fetus and no newborn for that matter, probably no child even up to the age of 2 or even 4 would have access to that kind of processing for for the kind of pain that they're discussing. That,
So if
that
can I
numbers.
clarify here? So the
Yeah.
previous or maybe even current definition stated that, or as defined, said that 2 to 4 year olds might not be capable of feeling pain by that definition? Or am
It's
I taking
they
that too far?
no, you're not. It's like a very I'm sorry, any IASP folks who might be watching this, but it's almost like one of those Supreme Court decisions that's never quite definitive, and so it leads all the legal scholars into their own little camps where they
Uh,
just yell at each other from across, hey, yeah, and so the early pain people would be like, and then the late pain people would be like, no, you're crazy, and it just is like what's Gulliver's Travels, the big enders versus the little enders, where they
mhm.
prefer to break the egg on this big end versus the little end. And that's kind of what it developed into. It didn't solve anything. It led to some really crazy counterintuitive policies. Uh, early on, I always drag this in here, but it's just so crazy that some people still don't know it. And I mention it at every point for that reason. Back in the 1980s, back then when you were in high school and I was in middle school, was the first time when pediatric surgeons, as a matter of course, began providing officially anesthesia for the most in for any surgery, for any surgery, um, open heart surgery, brain
On
surgery,
now,
children,
you talking about children or what age group?
newborns typically, especially
Uh,
premature newborns, but oftentimes this extended to even older children.
no
Um,
anesthesia?
Typically pre-verbal children, because if they're verbal, they could be like, "Mom, Dad, that surgeon sucks. He didn't give me
Yeah.
one bit of anesthesia before he cracked my chest open."
Ooh,
Yeah, so you didn't know that?
no.
Yes.
In
So
the 80s.
when you were in high school, Dan, when you were in high school is when the
God.
AAPEDS, American Association of Pediatrics, I believe it was, first put out their little, I forget if it's a policy letter or what they call it, a memo of some kind saying, hey, we really ought to start providing anesthesia to newborns.
So what was the assumption that they just can't feel anything?
Yes, the
Or do we
cortex.
know?
Yeah, no, they just assumed based on, okay, so there's a lot of history to this. It goes back at least a century, I would say, but even possibly further than that if you want to go all the way back to Descartes. But the idea was that the cerebral cortex, that outer layer, for primarily when we talk about the cerebral cortex, I don't know what you know. I mean, you have a really in-depth knowledge of anatomy and physiology, but I don't know what you know about the neurophysiology, but the
Not much at
cortex is
all.
the outer layer of the brain. The cortex means bark. And
Mhm.
so the outer layer of the brain, the cortex, and it includes some of the internal structures as well. For example, you've heard of the prefrontal cortex with the sort of the executive center of the brain. And, you've got also the insula, and they've got all sorts of stuff, kind of a constellation of what people thought were pain centers. More recently, they thought they were pain centers. And if you had to have all of these pain centers online, or at least some of them, in order to have any sensation of pain or even consciousness, for the most part. So anyway, there was some. You talked about mythology
Hmm.
about physical therapy and chiropractic care. There's a mythology of pain as well, and I think it stems from a misunderstanding or a misappropriation of evolutionary development. I won't get into that too deep right now, but at least from a man named John Hewlings Jackson back in the 1800s. He's a very famous in certain circles, very famous neuropsychologist, and he thought that the brain built, we have the neocortex, right? We have which means it came later evolutionarily. That's the neo part of it,
Newer
and
version.
then yeah, and so as you go down, you start going down. You um, uh, almost like you go down the evolutionary tree down to the trunk as you go from up top down to the brainstem, the
Mm.
spinal cord. So it's one of those. Uh, uh, anyway, so I'll leave it at that for now. But he thought that the thing that made us human, and this is still widely held, I would say, is the cortex. The cortex makes us human, but what we extended beyond that was everything that makes us human, and that includes consciousness, which is not clear that we're the only species that possess consciousness at all.
Not that we
Uh,
can even define consciousness, by the way.
oh, open that
Well,
can of
okay, that's
worms,
going to
right?
be another conversation,
Yeah.
probably.
Oh, I mean,
That'll be
like
another
you can,
conversation.
like we're kind like this is a much longer explanation than I don't even know how to give a 2 minute explanation or much
Yeah,
less an elevator speech. But
sure.
for this, suffice to say, I think personally that John Healings Jackson started this idea that the cortex is necessary for pain, and I call this is my contribution to pain science. It's cortical necessity. The
Hmm.
idea that the cortex is necessary to perceive pain.
Hmm.
And they applied this. So for example, veterinarians also applied this to their patients, and they would also strap the dogs or cats or whoever they were surgerizing. They would strap them to the operating table, just as pediatric surgeons would strap down their patients, strap them down, and they would strap them. I'm laughing, but it's horrific. I mean, what else can you do? Um, they would strap down their patients. Who was it? Myron Yaster was a pediatric surgeon out on the East Coast back in the 80s, and he said it's like roping and tying down a steer before you brand it. He said parents would be shocked if they
And this is
knew
in our lifetimes.
in our lifetimes. Dan, you were full on raging teenager at the time. You graduated in '88, right?
87.
So you were a senior in high school before American Association. I hope I got the name right, but
Yeah.
before it was even incipient policy to start, as a matter of course, treating infant pain.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So okay, so where does that leave us? Now we're in the same position with fetal pain. Same position with fetal pain. And it's even more entrenched because fetuses, as far as we know, can't remember anything explicitly, although I would definitely argue that they remember things implicitly and
Hmm.
procedurally. For sure, because if we don't treat their pain in the womb when we give them surgery, it turns out that they wind up developing a lot of psychological problems, potentially. Very commonly, I will say that, develop psychological problems to deal with, whether it's ADHD or some kind of post traumatic syndrome type symptoms. So we know that it affects them somehow. Uh, Anyway, so that's a little bit of the background. I don't know if that answers your question, Dan. I've just been talking.
Yeah, I think it does. I
Yeah,
think it does. Um, man, okay. So and touch on this for us, if you will, the importance of fetal pain to the um, pro or anti-abortion
yeah,
discussion, because that's
yeah,
kind of what your field of study is being. It's kind of the direction you're aiming it at.
yeah,
I'm guessing, or
yeah.
if I had to put it in words.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because the very reason Stuart and I were able to agree enough to write a paper to begin with was because neither one of us thinks that fetal pain necessarily impacts the right to abortion. It's a completely separate issue. If you just look at the facts, there's no reason why fetal pain ought to have anything to do with abortion. Okay, I mean, pain does not equal death necessarily, um, and so
It would
so
just
if
be
we
inhumane, essentially.
you could argue it's just inhumane, and you can treat the pain. And in fact, I think that France actually does give fetal anesthesia in some sense before these later abortions. So I don't actually know that much about their law, but that's what I understand. At least they offer it,
Hmm.
which is interesting, right? Um, that could be us. I mean, there's the risk, of course, in saying that fetuses feel pain, and people are like, okay, well, let's just give them anesthesia and proceed. I mean, that is certainly one avenue. I mean, that's a
Sure.
legitimate avenue. And
Sure.
Stewart was like, well, it's reasonable. It's a reasonable thing to ask, is what Stewart says. He says, but I don't think it has to happen. It's a decision that can be made by a woman and her doctor, the maternal patient and her physician. He says, it's not a big deal to me. It's like, I just don't want, is what he's saying. I just don't want the rights of pregnant women to be impeded just because the fetus can or cannot feel pain. I don't think that should enter into the question necessarily, except in, okay, should we treat this pain or not? Um, so I've kind of lost track of your question, but it
So,
does. I
so
guess the point is, it doesn't have to affect, does not have to affect abortion at all. And the only reason it does is because it seems to matter. It seems to matter to the other side primarily. In fact,
mm,
most of the pushback I get, or much of the pushback I get, is from our own side, from I say my own side,
pro-life
which
side.
is pro-life side. Yep.
Hmm.
They're like, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. And like, well, you pro-life and pro-choice side seem to agree here. But why does the pro-choice side say it doesn't matter and they fight it? Like, if it doesn't matter, why fight it?
Yeah.
By fighting it, by acknowledging the fetus in any regard, the pro-choice side is shouting to me, shouting to us that fetal pain does matter somehow. There is a morally significant life in the womb at the time of pregnancy. So, so that's the weird side. And what that all boils down to, Dan, is I think that, it's funny. I didn't intentionally have these books handy, but like this one right here, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Dehumanizing the vulnerable. Uh, Dehumanization is, I think, it. In order to kill something or someone, we need to dehumanize it. I don't know why. I don't know why.
Yeah.
It just seems to be the thing because most people will not accept killing of anybody in the human form. Anything that is human or resembles human, they just don't. And this is extended largely to animals now, as you know.
Hmm.
People by and large resist, illogically even, uh, killing anything in the human form. So therefore, it has been necessary historically to dehumanize that which we seek to kill.
Yeah, we have to call, the Jews animals or rats before German citizens would accept the idea of exterminating them.
Yeah,
Or
and
criminals have to be evil to
yeah,
justify the death penalty or something like that.
yeah, it certainly makes that choice go down easier, doesn't it?
Hmm.
So, and I don't know, you've been sympathetic to my pro-life uh, discussions, and I don't think that necessarily makes you pro-life. Just for
I
clarification,
can give
whoever
I can
listen.
give you my temporary position or current position.
Yeah, sure, and it's good to characterize it that way. Everything is, subject to change.
Yeah, that
But
that old expression, strong beliefs weakly held.
yes, I like that.
That,
I
that's what
like
I
that.
that's what I shoot for. Of course, I don't achieve it
Yep.
every time. But so the way I see, and again, I have nowhere near the depth of education and study and research and experience that you do in this field, but neither do most people. I
Yeah.
mean, you've made this kind of a life's work almost, and for me, it's if we zoom out on this, abortion versus not abortion idea, it seems to me that both sides tend to talk past each other because
Yep.
um, the pro-life people, and I'm not talking about you necessarily, but the pro-life people say, "Hey, you're killing a baby." The
Yep.
pro-choice people say, "You're violating a woman's rights, her
Yep.
autonomy." So
Yep.
they're not even there's no meeting point of those two,
Mm.
and also what I think we're really talking about is, when does personhood start, if you want to call it personhood, and I know that could be a whole different discussion, but
That is a very rich field to
yeah,
discuss.
in multiple avenues
Yeah.
at the moment, but basically, I don't think any side, absent some fringe people, there are people who want to blow up abortion centers, and there are people who want, I mean, infanticide is a thing, right? So we got extremes on both ends, but I think the huge majority of people don't want to kill babies. I mean, obviously.
Agree. In fact, I'll go so far as to say maybe a fraction of 1% actually want to kill babies. I think the reason they resist calling this creature a baby is for at least that reason. And so I'm okay with that as a explanation. Actually, I think that's actually encouraging in some sense. But yeah, please continue.
Yeah, most people. I mean, I think most people are decent. And anyway, so we got the if we just assume we've got fringes on both sides that are going to be insane, then the real question is when at what point is it? I mean, if we start from conception, and I know that it's probably a fairly commonly held belief, or maybe more I don't know how common, but I would think, I mean, the Catholic Church considered birth control a sin at some point, didn't they?
Yeah. And yet, I think yes, and I think that practically applied, most Catholics are probably in favor of it being legal.
Of it being illegal, or I mean,
being legal. Yeah, I think that
legal.
most
Okay.
Catholics, whatever the Vatican says, I think that most Catholics seem to be in favor of it remaining legal.
I see.
Overwhelmingly.
Yeah.
I think. Okay. Sorry, Catholics, if I got you wrong. I'm not Catholic.
Yeah, and same. So some people, I mean, you could say, well, where does life start? Does it start at conception? Which is, I mean, that's something to consider. And then,
I mean, that's what the word means, but never mind that. It's what the word means.
Yeah,
that's what the word.
True. That's true.
Anyway, proceed.
But then you've got the whole gestation period.
Yep.
With different developmental changes along the way, and the reason I think, other than us talking past each other, or both sides talking past each other, each one is kind of setting up. I don't want to say they're setting up straw men, but it's almost a straw man situation where they're mischaracterizing the other side's argument and saying, no, they just want to control our bodies, or no, they just want to kill babies. And I don't think either of them is actually true.
Or they're killing babies, whether they want to kill babies or not. They are killing babies. Yes. They would resist that just as strongly. It's a step down from that far side to say, just to call that creature a baby is out of bounds. So it's not, you don't even have to take the strong position that they want to kill babies. You don't have to make them into a murderer, like a intentional murderer, but that position would be just as strongly resisted by the other side, who claims women's autonomy, women's rights to control her body. That would resist that, I think, just as strongly as someone who's saying they just want to kill babies,
right?
Which is interesting to me.
Yes. So, and of course, there's some good arguments. If we steel man each side, meaning try to give the best representation, an honest representation of their best argument. I would say the pro-choice people would. I've heard the argument that, hey, this is until it's independent, which, however you define that, till the fetus is independent, can survive on its own. Maybe that's a milestone that gets picked. It's just a part of the woman's body, just like, a spleen or something. And if the woman decides, hey, I don't like that part of my body, they can remove it. Why should anyone care? And I think there are probably more. I think the pro-choice side would have other points on that list. I haven't studied this at all, but just
that's a major one, though. That's a major one. Yeah.
And then the pro-life side would say, you don't get to just choose to end a human life. And here is evidence of human life. Oh yeah, there's a heartbeat, and we have all these developmental milestones. The problem is, we know when a baby comes out, okay, no one wants to do it harm then. when a baby is born,
Yeah,
no,
not very many people
not
would
very
harm the
many.
baby then, and they would consider it out of bounds.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
But 5 minutes prior, or
yeah,
a month prior, or 2 months prior. So the problem is where to draw the line, and there are no bright lines. I mean, this is my opinion. We can
yeah,
always
yeah,
point at things and say, "Oh yeah,
yeah,
here's when this important thing has happened." But there are many important things that happen in field development, I'm sure. So picking the one that is the um, it's the do not cross this line point seems like it would be difficult. And so to me, it seems like, well, no wonder everyone argues about this, because there you can just, it's going to be an arbitrary point in development, regardless uh, of whether you say it's a conception or it's a heartbeat or it's a, you know, um, movement. I don't know. I don't know what all, you would know all those things, but whatever we pick, it seems like it's gonna feel arbitrary, at least to lay people. Now, maybe you know, science and research will catch up and say, oh, well, there actually is this really big step that happens at this stage of gestation, and maybe it's easier for people to accept it. You know, okay, we won't cross that line. This is just me guessing about other people's opinions on this, but personally,
and you see me smirking over here, right?
yeah, I do. I do. I do, yeah.
Please, Dan, continue. I'm actually listening. I'm not just formulating a response.
Yes. Okay, good. So it seems to me like, as far as I feel about abortion, I think early term, sometime early term, I could be okay with emotionally, or
Yeah,
at least okay enough to actually do it.
yeah,
But you know, at some point, I mean, we have babies born prematurely, and they thrive. I mean, pretty prematurely, and turn out great. So, um, again, this is just me saying, oh, here's something that's important to me. This stage of development. Other people have other important stages. So for me, it seems like if we're ever going to get any kind of at least temporary resolution of this, it's going to be some kind of compromise.
What's they do? Okay, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
So as you're saying that, I'm always curious,
Yeah.
because as you say, you know, there's this continuum, and it is continuous. I mean, it is continuous from a certain point. Nobody knows what point that starts. Um,
Well, we know conception is technically the
oh
start.
wait, what did you say?
but but on the other hand, I would not feel guilty for wearing a condom, which is averting. And I know that that the egg hasn't been fertilized, but there's an argument to be made that preventing the condom prevents the egg from being fertilized, and therefore it's preventing a life from happening. I mean, I've
Dan,
heard people make that
I'm not having sex with a woman right now, so I'm preventing an egg from being fertilized. I'm
Yes,
so
yes.
sorry. I'll be right back.
That's a good point. Yes. Anyway,
Maybe
I'll
later.
let you.
Maybe later.
Yes. But I mean, even the morning after pill, I don't have
Yeah.
any problem with that. I wouldn't cry myself to sleep over a fertilized egg that didn't make it.
Well, what does the morning after pill do?
Uh, it sounds like it. Well, you know better than I. I just
Yeah,
know it exists, and I know that
yeah,
it's an option. Well, it works within a window shortly after
yeah.
or after impregnate.
After
What is the
sex, after
term?
sex.
After sex. Okay.
Yeah, after sex, and they call it unprotected sex. So sex without some kind of contraception, which means conception is prevented from happening, as
All right.
with your example of the condom.
Yes.
But the
Conception,
morning
that's already happened.
exactly, and that is a thorny issue all its own, because
What's your position, John?
there is no uncontested ground in this debate. I'm telling you, there is zero uncontested ground. But I want and I will tell you, remember that question, but I wanted to ask you one first. Okay,
Mhm.
so where in gestation, and then I want to answer your question about the Jordan Peterson tweet later because that was what started us this whole journey.
Yeah,
Where, but
we were
remember
worried
your
we weren't going to have
question.
anything to talk about here.
Oh gosh, how long is this? How long have we been at this, Dan? How long is this going? Did you start a timer? Because I didn't start a
I
timer.
think we're about an hour.
We're probably at an hour.
Yeah. Oh, this could be our
Honestly,
topic. This is going to be our
yeah,
topic.
okay. This is our one topic for the day.
Yeah.
Where in gestation and why? I take it you would have some limit on abortion. Is
Yeah.
that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
So what gestation roughly, and what is your reasoning, if you have anything that you would care to share?
If I had, and I'm willing to be persuaded with a better argument, but
Okay.
I can say for sure the stage where beyond that the baby could be viable, meaning it could
Okay.
survive on its own outside with medical help or not.
Okay.
I'd say
Okay.
for sure to me that's a hard line because if the and I say baby, I know I'm using all the words wrong here. Someone say that's a fetus, that's not
Then
a baby.
shame on you. You're not a good pro-choicer.
Yes,
You must
I'm
you
an
must
uneducated layperson who doesn't know all the fancy words. So y'all are just going to have to forgive me or hate me, I guess. But
you must hew to the lexicon.
yes,
You are now you're dangerous territory here, Dan. They may
yes,
not claim you.
words are important these days. I mean, they're always important,
Yeah, they're
but
always important. You're right.
but I would say that would be a hard line for me.
Okay.
Anything beyond that, I would say for sure not. I would consider making that limit earlier in gestation with other, a better argument than mine.
Yeah.
Uh, but that's kind of where I sit, willing to be
Okay.
dislodged.
Okay. Well, strong opinions loosely held. I appreciate that. Okay, and to your mindset, viability, and let me just tell you this: many abortion providers have flatly stated that if the woman does not want the fetus, child, clump of cells, that the pregnancy is unviable. If she
Oh
doesn't want it,
wow!
it is not
Any
viable.
stage, at
Yeah.
any
So
stage of
what?
development,
So right. So what does viability mean to you?
it
It's all
means
sort of like define your own medical term today.
yeah. So yeah, we really see this the last 5 years or so.
Yep.
The uh, disagreement just about definitions of words.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
but to me, viable would mean it's a premature baby or not. But anything from a premature baby that typically would make it on its own outside of the womb, if delivered early.
With proper medical care, right? You're not just flinging the baby
Yeah.
into the crib.
Yes. I mean, even a full term baby probably wouldn't, or as a group, they may not do that well if they did not have the right care. In fact, they wouldn't. Feeding is part of that care, and staying warm and
What?
not getting attacked by animals. All that's part of care. But if say 80% of babies at this stage of development make it outside with what
80%.
if that's just me pulling a number out of the air,
Okay. Okay.
if 80% of them do,
And why not
why?
60%?
I know it's
That's the
arbitrary,
danger. It's vulnerable to that. Okay, but please, so 80% at
yet
that
we
age.
draw a line somewhere.
Yeah, yep.
We have to.
If not conception, then we are definitely talking about
But even is a line.
conception is the beginning of the organism
Sure. Which I
by
totally
definition.
I totally
By
agree with.
definition. Okay, good. So we got that. All right. So I'm
Yes.
not trying to convince you here, but I'm just trying to, because I know people will say, "Well, John, why did you bring that up when he said that?" Doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't care. Plus, there's something in me that won't let it go.
Yes, yes.
Well, I'm not gonna.
Sneak that one in there, Dan.
Right. I'm not going to get all vituperative on you today, Dan. And I think that's the benefit of this discussion is just exploring each other's thought processes, and in some way giving access, maybe if we post it. And I mean, do you think this is post
Oh, I'd
worthy?
love to. I'd love to.
I think anything is post worthy if we do it, if we post it. That's how we know if it's post worthy, is if
Yes.
we post it.
If we hit upload, then it's post worthy. But here's
For
the
sure.
thing. The topics like we're having the one we're
Yeah.
discussing now,
Yeah.
when, if ever, do you find people discussing these things calmly and trying to reason through them together from different viewpoints? It's almost never. And unfortunately, there's a long, lengthening list of topics like that these days that are just verboten and off topic that you're not allowed to question. Maybe we'll bring some of those up in future talks, but that's one of my red flags is if a proponent of an idea isn't willing to discuss it and field questions about it that may be criticisms or but just
Even questions.
any questions.
Yep.
That's a red flag for me that
Yep.
about the strength of that argument, or at least of the person making it, and how solid their position is. Because I mean, science is the questioning of ideas over and over and over with the intent to disassemble them and take them apart. And only if we cannot does it become useful information. So I love that you and I can have these conversations, which is part of the reason we're sharing them to whoever
Yep.
might be interested. If not only just to show that, hey, it is possible to have these kind of conversations in a
Yep.
reasonable and thoughtful way, but these conversations need to be had, because otherwise they end up separating, they end up polarizing us, like we see not just here in the US, but we see it across the world. I mean, lots of polarization and us versus them mentality, and it's dehumanizing for each side to think of the other as so far away from sanity that they can't even grasp simple concepts. And I feel like both sides of many of these topics, they feel that way about their ideological opponents. So, and that's,
I'm glad you said that.
That's a dangerous recipe, because if we can't respect people who have different opinions than us, the other opinion might be the right one. Just because I believe something, I've had beliefs changed. It doesn't feel good, but you're smarter after, you're wiser after, and your world view is more accurate. So more kinds of conversations we can have like this, and the rest of the world can have, I think the better a place it may end up being, hopefully.
Well said, Dan. And if and I don't know, we probably should endeavor to close this down in a little bit, as far as this portion goes, to be continued. But I'm grateful that you brought that up, because ultimately I suspect, correct me if I'm wrong, that is, besides just enjoying each other's conversation and, just making contact, connecting, which I always enjoy. It seems that for both of us, we value this ecumenical, uh, um, egalitarian approach to these very difficult questions, where every side needs to be heard, maybe not equally valued, but we need to at least know what the stakeholders are saying and let them have their say. Because if we try to shut it down, you and I both, I think, agree, shutting down the other side is not the way. And because we don't see
Zero
eye to eye.
converts that way. Zero
Oh yeah.
converts.
And Lord help us, the ones who do convert that way, right? Because the way you convert them is the way you keep them. And the way you keep them is the way you convert them. And we like that. That's a very bad recipe. That leads us darker down that dark hole where we don't want to be. Dehumanization, I agree. And I think that ultimately, at least the secondary purpose of these conversations that we're trying to record here, starting with this one, is to model, to think aloud how two people can talk about divisive issues without going at each other's throats. Because you and I think both agree it's so rare, that some people may not even consider that it could be done. And so how can you love somebody if they think differently than you? Like, Dan, you're a murderer. You support abortion until viability, and you didn't give me a gestational date, but it's at least 22 weeks. So that makes you a murderer, Dan. Am I? But here I am. I'm not saying that. I don't actually believe that about you, and I love you as a brother. I mean, like the black people mean it, not like the related people.
I'll take it both ways. Yes, I'll take it.
Which I think is much more meaningful.
Yes, yes,
That's a quote from a movie. I hope you recognize that quote, by the way.
yes. Oh
It's
yeah.
okay, Zoolander. Yeah. All right. So anyway, I don't want to string this out, but I did want to highlight that. And you know, when I was a teacher, um, my students couldn't tell by looking at me what I was thinking, oddly enough. And when I came up with a solution to a math problem, dishwasher's coming. The last one caught on fire last night, but that's a different
Oh,
story.
wow. The whole episode
Uh,
right there.
right. That's I survived. What can I say?
That's
I'm
even
a
better than a
survivor.
dumpster fire.
Dishwasher, dumpster. I'm working my way up there, just the stepwise progression, Dan. But when I was a teacher, my student, I come up with an answer. What's 4 + 4? It's 8. They're like, it's magic. I don't have the magic of Mr. Bachman. I could never be like Mr. Bachman. But if I walk them through stepwise, of small to big, dishwasher fire to dumpster fire sort of a progress, then and talk them through, they'll know what my thinking is. And that's kind of what I hope for our
Yeah.
conversations to demonstrate, is
Yeah.
to get our process in other people's minds, and to solidify our own, to explore stuff for our own sake first, right? Because that's the only thing that matters. If we're trying to do it for them, we're going to be inauthentic.
Yeah.
But to do it for our own sake first, I think, is where the value is. And then to share with others the mental processes that get us to a place where we can actually connect about these very difficult topics. And I really value that. And I love you for it, and
Hey,
many
yeah.
other things too.
I feel the same. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's I just lost my thought here. I did want to say that it's important to know, because I think a lot of us in the world don't realize this, that thoughtful, rational, kind, well-intentioned people can have opposing opinions,
Yes.
and do.
Yep.
So just knowing that one thing, that someone who is as good in their heart as we would want everyone to be can have the opposite viewpoint of me, it takes a lot of the pressure off, as far as me having to stand up against evil, So if someone has a different idea than me, and I think that's an evil idea, only evil people have it, then I'm not going to be thoughtful, and I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to consider what they have to say. I may not realize, wait a second, I think their position's a little better than mine. I'm not going to realize any of that. And we're never going to get any closer. We're just going to stay repelled by each other's failure to recognize that two well-intentioned people who both want the same thing, which is a better society, more loving, better health for everyone, better, a better community. We all want the same things. We just have different ideas about how to get there.
Yeah.
And if we can see that commonality, I think that would just open up doors for people to talk about stuff. I know what I was going to say. One last thing. When I'm in a discussion with someone about a viewpoint or an idea, and we're disagreeing, my first clue that I have a poorly held position, a poorly thought out ideology, is if I start to get angry.
Yes. And I start to feel the tension in my shoulders, and I start to feel like a little bit of maybe a little flush. Yeah. And I start to get like a heart pounding, and I'm like, hold on. Lower the shoulders, deep breaths.
Yes.
It's a great point. Yeah.
So that's my built-in cue. It's like the red light flashing on my dashboard. Okay, you're trying to hold some ground that may not need to be held. You should probably reconsider this. And also, it makes conversations that much more enjoyable when you're not feeling that way the whole time. Because I don't make good arguments when I'm, defensive and, but sputtering and but you're an idiot, ad hominem stuff, which is what we see today. So that's my personal cue. Let me know.
That's a
I'm
great point.
thin ice.
Yeah, the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system response makes us dumber because we're supposed to be fleeing or fighting or freezing if you want to go that route. And we're not supposed to be intellectualizing something. We're not supposed to be connecting when we're in fight or flight. And if we are in fight or flight, I agree, it means that there's something in us that feels threatened.
Yes.
Great points, Dan. And just in the interest of keeping this compact, what do you say we end it here?
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
For this particular, I do have I don't know if I'm going to make it to the gym today, but we, with things catching on fire around the house and
Yes.
whatnot, it's a different topic. But
well, I
hey,
love this. I'm looking forward to our next chat, John. And man, I love you, brother. And looking forward to seeing you soon. You're going to be coming to visit me, so I'm looking forward to seeing you and the girl.
Yeah. Yes, I look forward. I couldn't be happier about that. Love you, brother.
Love you too, John.
All right.
See you, man.